So you and I have been having this discussion for a while about whether or not it would be a good idea, or just toying with the idea of maybe go to some church services in the local area and then come back and have a conversation and just talk about it. And we've done that. We do that a lot. We have all these great conversations after going to church based on things that we heard at church or witnessed, or it could be anything from the music to the preaching to something else. And then we have these conversations. And so we had this idea that maybe, those might make great content for videos, like other people might be interested in hearing these conversations. So that's what we're trying here. We're recording a video. We're recording a conversation that we had
about
having gone to church
this morning. About
what was at church. And I don't want it to come across as critical, because some people will think maybe we're doing a sermon critique.
Oh, no.
And that's not really the idea. The idea is that when you go to church, things prompt you to think. Mm-hmm. Sometimes about things that are completely unrelated to what was said.
Right.
And
you're supposed to get, or at least I feel like you're supposed to get something out of it, not just
right.
sit and get, in terms of check it off, I went to church Sunday.
Yeah, you should be getting something out of it.
Exactly.
And so the conversations that we have about what we get out of it have been some of the best conversations we've had. And they've led to other kinds of conversations. So we took notes today, yeah?
Yeah.
And we already talked about some of the stuff over lunch.
I know. We may need to start recording during lunch instead of waiting.
Bust out the phones or something, right. Just hit record, start recording some of that. So there is this unique situation, like you say, oh, we should record this conversation, but then as soon as you turn the cameras on, it gets weird. It's like, it's not the same. Mm-hmm. And then if you know that you're going to record a conversation later, it unnaturally prompts you to us to, oh, maybe I should save that for later, mm-hmm. and have the first raw thing on film. And then, so it kind of messes up, when we're going to film, it messes up the natural conversation. And then when you turn the cameras on, it messes that up too. So it's not, knowing that the camera's on is its own element, which interferes with the dialogos, if you will.
I don't think it would be just the camera. I mean, if it were just hit record on our phones and start talking, I think that would be great, but I don't know that I don't know. Yeah. I don't know that would be enough.
Yeah, I don't know either. So we both took notes today. Like some TV shows have a little podcast that comes on after the TV show to talk about the TV show. So maybe this would be something like that. Maybe we could do different churches. Maybe we could keep doing this church. I don't know. I like to take my notes in my Olive Tree Bible app. You want to start talking about your notes first?
Yeah, so the scripture that was of topic this morning was Matthew 28:18, which, after being a Christian for so many years, you've heard
that passage.
You've heard it, which is it never gets old, but it's kind of exciting to see, or at least for me to see. Okay, so what's the take on it now? Let's see what's
he going to say that maybe I haven't heard before.
Yes, which I enjoy. Mm-hmm. And so it was interesting because it aligned so closely to what this particular church body, their vision and goal, which I think is great to see it totally align with the Great Commission.
So this church, what they started off in 1993? And they're up to, like 13 campuses now?
Yeah. It may have been a little bit later. Maybe 98, 99, maybe? I don't know. I don't know the church history.
Right. But I think you said today they're up to 13 campuses. So as far as the mission that they stated today, they are doing some of that. I think we'll probably get more into that as we get into what these little 3 points are.
Yeah.
He apparently last week he talked about the vision, what you want to see, and then this week, and I didn't hear last week. We were doing something else last week. And then the mission is what you want to do, and then he said what you want to do in order to accomplish the vision. And the Bible says where no vision is, the people perish. But that also makes me think, so that's good. It's good that you know that, and that's true. But you would also need to know that you had a good vision to start with if your mission is to bring that vision to pass. Like if you're well organized and you're bringing the vision to pass, but what if it's a bad vision? What if your vision is to put syringes in Halloween candy? If it's a bad vision, bringing it to pass isn't necessarily good. So another way of saying this is the most famous question people ask probably is, how do I find out what God's will is for my life? And if you're a church, the question would be, how do I find out what God's will is for the church, for this particular church? It's obvious. I think it's pretty obvious from the Great Commission kind of what a church should be doing, and he lays that out here in this sermon. But then, what should this church be doing? Like we have friends who are starting up a church in this area here, and that would be, I put myself in their shoes sometimes, and I think, if I were starting up a church in this area, why would I be starting it? What would I be trying to accomplish that the other churches that people can go to aren't doing? And that's I'm not so sure that's an easy question.
I wouldn't imagine it's easy. I mean, even in just my personal life, I think we have I don't know. See, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. I had a conversation at lunch, and now I'm like, I don't remember,
Well, you said, I think you said something feels daunting. You kind of have an idea of what people should be accomplishing with we were talking about qualitative versus quantitative transformation. And the pastor's point that he brought up today was this, they like to do alliteration here. So he was saying, what was he saying? Gather,
grow, and go.
All right?
Yes.
Not bad. It's a memorable sermon title. It's, you have the assembling of yourselves together. But when he was talking about grow, I think that's what we were talking about. We were talking about how there's not really I kind of wanted him to get into something that was more qualitative of a transformation rather than just quantitative, because they're growing numerically. The church they started off with a little small church. I think you were there back in the 90s when they were 100 people, and singing in the choir and stuff like that, or the praise chorus. And then all of a sudden now they're in an auditorium that seats 3,000. And they've gone to 13 campuses, so they're growing numerically. And then the question is, what are you doing? What are they doing for the individuals? What's that? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, they do have the small groups, which I think is vital for a body to have and offer, so that you can gather with people who are like you. I think many of the small groups, you see it in various churches, or I've seen it in many different churches, where they specialize the small group for, say, an age group, or maybe it's a group of people that have gone through something in life,
right? Like divorced couples, or
to have that similar. So they have that
drug rehab, something like that.
Which God knows we need. And
or college
need
and
to
career,
minister to and assemble with those groups. I think it's important in that respect.
So it's tempting to kind of say that when you just look at what he's saying to the group, if that's the depth of what he has to say, like maybe they have a broader vision, maybe they have a deeper vision for transformation, but a group of, to an auditorium that sits 3,000, maybe that's not the right audience
Right.
to go deeply about what the qualitative transformation is.
And I also, think that certain church bodies, perhaps they're more like a triage, like they are a quick reach the people that don't know anything, that have no background information on who Christ is and what the life that they can live with his direction and his love, encased and embedded in your life, what that would look like.
Right.
So sometimes it's a quick hit and get, if you will, in terms of the Great Commission. They are serving the masses, and like I said, I think you can get down into it with a telescope or a microscope of sorts when you get to those smaller groups. But I think that this particular body is to be a triage, to be a place where they can reach out quickly to large masses and share the gospel in various ways of service. And so I so appreciate that type of ministry. I think for me personally, and for many Christians who've been in church for the majority of our lives, I know for me, I seek for some type of continual transformation of who I am as a Christian. And that takes work on my part, as well as involvement in a gathering and growing.
See, I probably never would have worded it that way 10 years ago, like a continual transformation.
Well, I think if we stop...
No, I would say now for sure. Definitely. I see transformation as an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
I think some people limit it to conversion.
Which is vitally important in
It's like
the pathway of transformation, in my opinion. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. It's vitally important. It's like birth.
That's the beginning.
You can't be a 25-year-old with a career if you're not at least born, but you have to be born at some time.
Yeah. So to the point of this particular church body, they are obviously quantitatively spreading the gospel. They're spreading the message everywhere, in many different countries, and the thing is, it's global. They've gone global. The thing is now that I would like to know is, so how are they refining that? How are they changing? And how are they, how as we as Christians prevent or stop the process of acting out of ritual? See that?
And like repetition
For the individual.
Right.
But to still continue to move forward to reach the masses.
So yeah, I think so. He did make the statement like, if you grow, then you can go. Something like he tied fruit. I think I might have written it down. It was later on in the sermon, but he tied fruit to will not grow. Growth does not happen without gathering. Grow in your experience with God. The pastor's job is not to entertain, but to equip, grow in the ability to produce the fruit of the Spirit. I thought I remembered him saying a statement about, basically it amounted to, the more you grow, the more fruit you can bear. And he did. A lot of times when people say fruit, they're just talking about converts. But he did bring up the fruit of the Spirit too, which indicates it's not just a growth of adding numbers to the roll.
Right.
There is a growth of, like, say Paula and Kevin start off with just one fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5:22 mentions 9, and then eventually we've got 3 fruit of the Spirit. We're growing in the fruit of the Spirit. And then in each one of those, like love is a fruit of the Spirit. So in each one of those, you you qualitatively get the ability to love, and then you quantitatively add in your ability to love, which I would think would grow in other areas too. But one of the things that concerns me about the church at large in the United States, and this is something I honestly wrestle with this personally, is that I feel like I understand what ideological possession is, where somebody is just like brain dead, identified with a set of propositions, and they just believe those things, but they don't really know those things, and they would die for them, but it's kind of shallow. I mean, this ideological possession kind of thing, you could think of it in politics as somebody who would just argue you down over something about like climate change or abortion or something like that, but they've never really, they don't have any depth there. They have a lot of fervor and no depth. So I have this fear, and a lot of people say this, like that we're creating false converts is a quick way to say this, to cut to the chase. And like Billy Graham and many others have said that I'm afraid like up to 85% of our churches are filled with people who aren't born again. And so this idea of, if I just persuade somebody to mentally affirm a certain set of facts about Jesus, is that conversion? And I think
it's just the beginning.
Right. Well, that's just the beginning. But so you can mentally affirm the facts about Jesus and not be saved. Mm-hmm. You can.
Yes.
Yes. There's all these stories about people who believe it's true, but they're like, I'm not ready yet, or I need to tie up a few loose ends before I'm ready to commit to Jesus. Those kinds of things.
Well, they think it's a I've got to do to earn kind of thing.
Or like I need to stop selling drugs. Let me talk to the drug dealer one more time, my distributors one more time. If they got something going on, let me stop that. Then I'll come trust Jesus. Like, so they think it's true, but they'll do it next month. They'll commit next month. So just something about just persuading people to a set of propositional facts is not converting them. And even for the people who say, okay, yes, I believe this, I trust this, I don't know. It's like with some people it takes, like the parable of the soil, different kinds of soil. Some people it takes and it grows, and then some people you have what seems like a conversion experience, and then there's just nothing. There's no growth. There's no transformation. And then like, what are the metrics of that growth? And is it possible that so many American Christians have grown in a bad azimuth, in a bad direction, that they wouldn't recognize biblical growth if they saw it? Is that possible? I don't know. I think about these things. Like just going out, like the Great Commission, just going out and telling people about Jesus and having them mentally affirm that that's true.
That's why we have to disciple. I think it's more than just going out and telling them about Jesus. I think there's a responsibility to also demonstrate in terms of your own life the change that you've gone through. I think that's part of telling people the gospel too. I think it's part of telling them your story, your own personal transformation story. I think to me that's one of the most effective ways to share it.
In the book of Acts, it says you'll be witnesses of these things.
Yeah.
Telling your story.
That's right.
What did you witness happen in your life?
Right.
Tell that story.
And it's not a prescription. It's not a first do this, second do this, then you'll be this. That's it can't be like that. It's different for everyone. And so one of the things I thought about.
That's interesting. If you can hold that thought for a second, because in the book of Acts, I think what you have is a bunch of different descriptions, and some people try to make those prescriptions. Like, if this is what happened with, say, Lydia, that means that's doctrine for everybody. Well, not necessarily. What were you going to say a second ago?
I was just going to say, one of the things that I tend to do, I guess because I'm a teacher at heart, is I equate a lot of what my experiences in the classroom were with students to what I think preachers and those who share the word of God and share the gospel also contend with. You have to consider your audience, same with teaching. And there's not going to be one set of plans for every student in my classroom, because they're coming to the point of receiving the information that I have to share at different places in their lives, different backgrounds, different knowledge, different, especially with younger kids, we test them to see what they already know so that we know where to go from there. And I think in terms of Christianity, people are coming to their place of knowing Christ at different places in their lives.
Right. What I was thinking while you were saying that, not that I'm trying to think of what I'm saying next, but what occurred to me was that certain things, like in education, don't scale well. So the more you scale something, the less each individual gets that's tailored to them.
Yes.
So the absolute best form of education would be one-on-one. Like if the best way to learn plumbing would basically be to follow a plumber around everywhere he goes, apprenticeship, guildcraft, that kind of education. But that does not scale well. You can't. It's a lot easier to give 1,000 kids, maybe 55% of what they need, rather than every one of them 100% of what they, or 10 of them 100% of what they need. So maybe they have a little knowledge to grow off of, but it doesn't scale well.
It doesn't. So you have to give them something to start with, and then teach them how to synthesize it and learn to explore and grow outside of that, and sometimes of their own desires.
So you just said synthesize and explore. Those are processes.
Yeah.
Not propositions. When you say teach, I think a lot of people are going to think conveying propositional truth claims to other people so that they can recite them back.
That's kind of bad teaching in the world of education.
Yes.
One of my jobs was...
You are advocating processes.
Right.
Like procedural knowing.
That's true teaching.
Yes.
I know in my experience evaluating teachers in classrooms, that was one of the biggest things that we would try to get our teachers to understand, is that it's not a just sit here and spoon feed and then convince them that they know or understand what you're spoon feeding them. It's to teach them how to think on their own and how to take the information you're giving them and to think through it for themselves. Ask questions. That's the best type of learning environment there is, when you can get the people who are involved to start asking questions and feel safe to ask those questions and get excited about seeing the puzzle or the pieces come together. That's what in my experience is considered good education. I think that is something that I naturally overlay in my experiences as a Christian. Is that there's not a prescription. It's different for everyone, and to not be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to explore ideas. There's no one that. I think, for example, I think of you and your theological knowledge and what you know with the Bible, and I consider you an expert when it comes to the Calvinism topics. But there's so many topics that perhaps I would go listen to someone else to hear. And it's not because I devalue what you have to say. It's that I also want to hear something from a different perspective and a different background, a different topic, and then be able to put all that together and synthesize it myself, think on it myself. And I think the Holy Spirit and God's involvement in that thinking process comes very naturally as you grow and know God more.
So there's points of interaction. something I've been thinking a lot about for the last couple of years, I guess, is how you get exposed to information and then you take it out into life. And that information changes you a little bit. You take it out into life and then you see that information in a new light because of how you live. Then you come back to that information and then it seems like different information. It's like you grew and the interface with God also grew as far as you're concerned. Like you have a different perspective on it now. I think you were saying earlier that it was kind of like falling in love when you interact with God.
Absolutely. I can expand on that a little bit. When I first became a Christian, I equate it to a lot like falling in love in the respect that you're just getting to know someone and it's exciting and everything's new and you're like a sponge in terms of being a Christian, and in terms of falling in love you can't spend enough time, with that person.
Yeah.
And then as you begin to learn things about each other and in love, in a relationship, the same holds true to that in knowing God. It becomes you begin to know things about God that maybe not everyone else knows. It becomes a very intimate, one-on-one relationship, just like falling in love.
Yeah, you were saying before, like how it starts off, I think what you said is it starts off, your relationship with God starts off based on what other people have said about God.
Yeah, because you don't know. And the same holds true with dating or falling in love. You only know what maybe someone else has told you about that other person.
You get a narrative on it, yeah.
Same with being a Christian.
But then there's this transition. So it's a pretty well-established narrative, kind of what other people say about God. And in my experience, being in multiple different denominations,
Yeah.
Baptists, Assemblies of God, I've been around some Presbyterians, all this kind of stuff. The idea of God is more or less Americanized version of God, real similar. But I think what I heard you saying earlier, and as we talked, it was this idea that as you start your own relationship with God, that changes you, which changes your understanding of God, which then again changes you, which changes your understanding of God. So you fast forward now 5 years, 10 years. Now, what you know about God, or how you think of God, how you interact with God, is now vastly different from what you first heard about God where you started your journey, where you started that relationship.
Exactly. And it is quite complex or difficult sometimes to know God so much, and then to be able to put it out there very simply instead of complex. My relationship with God has become very individualized,
right?
Because it's me and Him, and
very bespoke,
right?
Yeah,
it is that that's the way it is. And I feel the same's true in your relationships with people. You know, it starts off, you don't know much about them, and then you grow to know, and the really great thing is how when you hang out with someone a lot, your best friend, or how we hang out, you start to impress upon them who you are. And that to me is the excitement of being a Christian now, is I get to grow and experience and learn things about God that He begins to impress upon me and continues to transform me. It's not like, oh, I did it, done, I'm different, I'm saved. It's never, to me, it's not like that.
So here's a struggle that I have. I would assess myself to have undergone some levels of transformation. There's a friend I have who listens to the YouTube channel, comes on Wednesday nights. He told me that listening to your videos from, a few years ago to now, it's very different. You've changed a lot, Along with that, I'll say that I have this concept of God now that is way different than the descriptions of God that were handed to me in my formative Christian years, I guess, when I was much
Not
younger.
necessarily wrong or different, do
Well,
you think?
I don't know. It's hard to find words to explain it. So what occurs to me is that when I go to church, what I hear resonating is people who have deeply embedded themselves in those descriptions of God. And that's like as if those descriptions are God. It's almost like a mental construct of God, like a false idol of God that is not really God. You can kind of hear it, I don't know how to tell someone else how to recognize this, but you can tell when they open their mouth and speak about God that they don't have any personal interaction basis from which they are speaking about God. They are repeating all the correct opinions that the church has fed to them. They've become well versed in them. They're just repeating them, and you can just sense it. You can tell they haven't been up to the top of the mountain and see the same view that you saw. They're just repeating other people's descriptions of it.
You know, when you say that, it makes me think, yes, you can kind of tell when you're dealing with certain people, groups, and such, of a true transformation of themselves. But what I also have quickened in my spirit is that be careful how you assess someone else's growth.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
And that is something it is a repeated thing in my life. You know, wait a minute.
Struggle, yeah. I'm not trying to put other people down. The struggle is when I try to talk to those people.
They just cling to that
well,
little...
I'm using the same words that they're using. But I can tell I have a different idea in my mind of what I'm talking about, and they can't.
And so that brings me to the point of, now, how do you get that... If you're perceiving that their ideas are not the same,
so I don't know how to communicate.
How do you get them to that point?
I don't know how to communicate the difference. How do you get them to see that there's a difference? There's a difference between what I'm trying to explain about God, between what XYZ person is trying to explain about God. And when I think of what other people are thinking when they hear sermons or when they hear Christian songs, and one of the problems I now have with Christian music, and I'm talking about what most fundamentalist Baptists would call good Christian music. I'm talking about like the old hymns. One of my big problems with that kind of music is that it seems to be reinforcing the idea version of God, not the relationship version of God. Every once in a while, I come across a good hymn that's got that poetic feel to it, to where you really feel that person interacted with God. I think the song "Be Thou My Vision" is that way. And then there's some songs that are just repetition of all the correct opinions.
Which that sometimes, and because we come from a different background in terms of music and religion, religious arenas, not necessarily, we're both Christians, but just a different background in that respect. Sometimes, and you're a music guy too, right. Music has always been somewhat of a passion of yours. But sometimes music is supposed to be simple and repetitive because it is of a worship nature. And even in the Bible, there's many, or at least a few that I can think of. That
one psalm, "His mercy endureth forever, His mercy endureth forever, His mercy endureth forever." It's very repetitive.
Yes.
Yeah.
But aren't there examples in Scripture where during worship things are repeated? Holy, holy, holy.
Lord God. Yeah, that's in Revelation. Yeah.
And so there are situations where this is so funny. We're off on this topic when we started with the Great Commission.
I want to talk about some of the stuff in the music too, though. So I'm not against necessarily repetition. I think the phrasing itself is what concerns.
Gotcha.
And let me clarify this too. And we've talked about this, but because of my independent Baptist background, I have had a negative valence for most contemporary Christian music. You know, and
And I love it.
right. Well, to me, it just by and large, it just seems like it's off a factory shelf somewhere, like it's state-sponsored art. You know, it says nothing. It's just this. Somebody's trying to manufacture. You know, we want to market this music to the Christian demographic. You have a little bit of talent. Take this song, throw some Jesus and God in there, and some prayer or something like that, and then we'll sell that to the Christians. It feels like that when I listen to a lot of it. But the the album that Healing Place put out recently, I don't even know what it's called, but
Trust.
I Will Trust You. That's one of the songs that's on it. But it's got about 10 songs on there, 10 or 12 songs. And you and I started listening to them, I don't know, about a year and a half ago when they came out. And I noticed right away. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think I've overcome some bias because I have noticed in this album, it is chock full of genuine, poetic, artistic. Somebody had a real spiritual experience when they wrote that stuff. You can feel it. You can feel it. So it is new. It is contemporary. It's got drums and electric guitars, but you can also sense. I can sense that somebody was really onto something. I mean, they were really connected to the spiritual realm when they wrote that, and I can feel that, and because of that, I can enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And so, my concern isn't necessarily with a particular genre of music or with how often something is repeated, but there's certain phrases, and I can't even explain how I know this, and maybe I don't know this, but when I hear something, I can tell if somebody's really in touch with God based on their transformational level that they're at, or whether or not they're just repeating approved phrases.
So some of that's discernment, I think.
And I'm afraid I've kind of backed off of Christian music altogether, like, because I want to write some. And I'm afraid to reinforce the idea concept of God. Mm-hmm. Unwittingly. Like whatever bad idea of God is in other people's heads, I'm afraid that when I talk about God, it will just bolster that and reinforce it rather than give them something to aspire toward.
It's so funny you use the word bad idea of God, and I'm sitting here thinking, it's going to be different. It's not always going to be like the way that you and I see it. Is that bad, or is that just different from the way you and I see it?
I don't know. You know, I think I'm more talking about like an ideologically possessed concept of God.
And I think your
like
hunger
some kind of boxed in, rigid kind of.
Where there's not life. Where there's
there's no life. It's
there's
stale,
no growth. It's
stale
just,
and stagnant. Right. It's other people's ideas.
Right. I know. I just like calling you out on it.
Call me out.
You're so tough on everybody. I'm just glad people are talking about God. I mean, that's a start, you know?
Yeah, that's a struggle to differentiate. I want to look at some of these other phrases that we got here. Speaking of music, if I can talk about music for a second. One of the songs that I really liked the way it sounded, and maybe you can remind me of the tune. It said, "All my life you have been faithful." Do you remember how that went?
They played it this morning?
Yeah.
No, I'm just trying to remember. I mean, you know how I am.
So,
I have music playing in the car. I have music playing everywhere, so I didn't know.
Yeah, this isn't intended to be a musical performance. So anyway, this phrase, and I'll say that when they sang the song, I can't remember how it went, but when they sang the song, it came to this phrase that said, "All my life you have been faithful." A lot of things happened to me at one time. Musically, it sounded great. I mean, the music of it was good. It was moving. Based on where I feel like I am in my Christian growth and journey and transformation, I could thoroughly rest in that and enjoy it. Mm-hmm. But it also occurred to me that some people might hear that differently than I'm hearing it. So, like, okay, what are the metrics of God being faithful? Is God faithful okay, maybe you think, oh, I've got a job, I've got married, I've got these beautiful kids, God is faithful to me.
Well, he's not a genie in a bottle that
Exactly.
grants
So-
wishes.
So then, when I was in recruiting, we had a soldier assigned to us because I was in Memphis, and what's in Memphis is St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And this soldier got assigned to us so his child could go to St. Jude's. It was this little 9-year-old girl, and she had cancer, and she died while she was there. It was horrible. It was a horrible thing. It was terrible. And I can't help but think of what goes through people's heads when they hear this phrase, all my life you have been faithful. What would the parents of that little girl think when they heard that? Or, my brother and his son were killed in a car accident. What do people
But
think?
God's faithfulness doesn't equate to God's faithfulness doesn't equate to
exactly
a life free of heartache.
Exactly, it doesn't.
It does not.
So how do we know he's being faithful?
It's a good question.
You see what I'm saying? It's like, no matter what your concept of God is, it could be Brahma or Buddha or whatever, you could see any situation, you could interpret it through a lens of XYZ entity being good to you. So,
Or not being good to you.
or not being
Right.
good to you.
I mean, some people-
Kali really has it out for me this week. I lost my job and got my car wrecked, and Shiva, the god of destruction's coming after me. There's no. There's so many things that are subjective, and I've been made aware of some really horrible things. Like, you remember, like all those Christians, all those Coptic Christians in Egypt who were marched out to the sea, and then their throats were slit and their heads are put on the beach. And like, all my life you have been faithful. So it doesn't mean all things are going good all the time. It doesn't mean bad things aren't going to happen. And then there's people who have stunted growth and they're backsliding. God's being faithful. Is that a faithfulness that we can tap into? And then also, how would a Calvinist understand that differently than a Christian would? Or like a non-Calvinist would. Because a non-Calvinist would probably say that God is working all things together for good to those that love him, but I also have a responsibility to walk with God.
Or maybe this is something that occurs to me. Someone being faithful doesn't mean they give you everything your heart's desire. Someone being faithful doesn't mean that there's not going to be some heartache. I mean, I think about our relationship being faithful to each other. That doesn't absolutely mean you're never going to hurt my feelings. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to be, down or encounter some kind of problems. And I think the same holds true with God. His faithfulness is the fact that he saved us. That's what I mean, it's saying what...
That's a really good point.
I mean,
like the fact that
that's what it
salvation is available to everyone is probably the only situation in which everybody can say that phrase.
Yeah. God is faithful in that way. It's so amazing to me how the analogy or the parallel to being in love and being faithful in that.
Right.
You've committed to love me. You've committed in that. And I think
have a
the
choice.
same and I think the same holds true in terms of
It's irresistible grace.
God's faithful in that it doesn't matter what happens, he's still going to love us. He's still saved us. You know what I'm saying? He's faithful. That's to me what I mean, what I think of when I hear that phrase. He's been faithful all my life.
And then
Doesn't mean he's going to make everything like a magic spell and everyth's just A-okay.
Right. So, it just occurs to me, like, what is going through other people's heads when they say these phrases?
Yeah.
I mean, are they... Because I'll tell you this, like, I've been honest in public before about some things that have happened in my past and in my life. Like, I've been divorced. My parents got divorced before I did. And in one sense, my parents getting divorced seems like the most horrible thing. But in another sense, it has been the birth of so much enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
So much. There's so much growth that has happened since then that would not have happened without that, as far as I can
And not
tell.
just in you. It's growth in
Right.
in
Right. I
in
mean,
other people's lives that were impacted by their being your mom and dad being married.
right. I feel like, yeah.
I mean,
true.
just talking to your mom some days, you can kind of sense there's some kind of learning and growing.
Right.
and-
Right. There's some growth there.
Yeah.
And like right now, I am the happiest I've ever been in my life, and I'm not saying that just because you're sitting here. But I have choice. I have the freedom to make whatever
That's right.
choices I wanted. If I didn't want to be with you, I wouldn't be with you.
That's exactly right.
That's how it would be. Mm-hmm. And I'm the happiest I've ever been. There's so many situational things in life that are the best they've ever been,
Mm-hmm.
and that this would not be happening if it wasn't for that event. My parents getting divorced.
Yeah.
I mean, none of this would happen. None of this would be here if it wasn't for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to like look back in awe.
For something that was what we've always been taught in the church is just a horrible, nothing good divorce.
Right.
You know, that's just, and it isn't. It's hard.
Right, it is
it's
a horrible
very,
thing. Now, at the same time, with my Christian worldview, I can look back and see God's orchestrating providential hand in all of this. But what if I was a Muslim? You know what I mean? What if I was a Hindu or and attributed it to Brahmin? Or what if I was spiritual but not religious and attributed it to the universe smiling on me? You know what I mean? It's like, so there's something to be said about the lens through which a person is looking. I guess that's all I wanted to bring up because as far as that's concerned. Let's see here. I'm going to go through a few of my notes. Do you have any specific notes that jump out to you?
I just loved the pastor's example of how he started out fearful and intimidated in front of a large audience of people.
Right. His example was of growth. When they moved into
Right.
that building, he said he was intimidated.
Yes. And
And
then
then
he grew to
Now it feels
be
like,
as comfortable as breathing.
right, that's what he said.
It is, and I thought that was good. I guess I'm trying to remember in what the whole gather, grow, go. He was talking about the grow part,
Right, right.
and how growing means to enlarge your capacity, and God expects that growth. He gave, I think it was an example of Jesus going to eat maybe figs or fruit.
Yeah, he's going to eat he's going to eat figs off a fig tree.
And it was just leaves, and there was no
growth, no fruit.
no fig, no fruit. And so his example was God wants us to grow.
He says, "Who wants to be?" How many? He said, I think he asked for a raise of hand. How many of y'all want to be all leaves and no fruit?
That's right.
You know?
That's right. And then he brought up Psalm 92,
13 and 14.
planted and flourished. And then he got into what was the Greek meaning, fat and full of sap.
Yeah,
With the
fat and
word
flourish.
flourish.
So Psalm 92, 13 and 14 says, "Those that be planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God, and they shall still bring forth fruit in old age. They shall be fat and flourishing."
So the importance there was that they be rooted. And he gave an example of a new tree in his front yard that
started off as like a twig size.
right?
And then
now
after
it's
14
this-
years, they had to cut the branches back
Yeah.
because it was growing over the house.
So we want to grow in experience with God, maturity and understanding of His Word. You know, I think point two, the growing part impressed. That's where the bulk of my notes and thoughts came in, was the growing part. The gather and the go seemed pretty straightforward, but that growing piece, that's I wish there was some way to tap into that in terms of sharing the experience of being a Christian.
Tap into it?
Meaning figure out a way to get other Christians to crave that and want that growth.
Well, that's a really good way to put that.
Because we can think, oh, we've arrived. We're saved.
The phrase that I wrote down is, what are the metrics of growth? Mm-hmm. The problem with that, I think that's a good question, but I cannot think of a good answer, because as soon as you answer it, people are going to virtue signal that answer.
Okay, so here's something from my teacher perspective. When we measure a teacher's success or effectiveness, there's part of a formula, if you will, where we measure what the student knew when they started and then where they came to. And so that distance between where they started and where they've come to, that's their growth. And it is a direct correlation to that teacher's performance.
Yes.
So that, to me, is
well, in the sermon today, he said you can judge a teacher by their students.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I did mention something about that,
So you
too.
said, I didn't mean to cut you off. That to you is...
Yeah. I thought I had written down something about there. Oh, leadership is not what your followers do when you're there, but what they do when you're not there.
Yes.
And that's in parenting, that's in teaching, and
being a pastor.
Yeah. Any kind of leadership.
Yep.
Anyway, I think I'm jumping all over the topics.
No, I think I interrupted you.
It's okay.
You were in the middle of saying something. Yeah, so I wrote down, what are the metrics of growth? And the thing that bothers me about that is, as soon as you said, well, a person who has grown will XYZ. Well, as soon as you come out and say that, a lot of people will exhibit XYZ without ever having embodied the wisdom behind generating it in the first place. They will virtue signal it.
Right.
Which is...
Part of that is the in-group belonging thing. They want to be a part of a body.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Because when he was talking about gathering, there was nothing false about what he was saying with gathering, but I would say that it was missing a warning about mistaking in-group conformity for growth. So he was talking about gathering, like the Bible says, assemble yourselves together. In the church, all the spiritual gifts that you have are intended for other people, which means you're supposed to interact with other people so that you can minister to them, so you can edify other people. You have to interact with other people in order to edify each other. So he said it doesn't happen in isolation. Proximity creates passion. And this is he said something he's learned in his life. Proximity creates passion, and distance creates disinterest. And so far, so good. I get that. He said, there's something inside you that I need. You need what's inside me. Now, I resonate with that strongly because I keep saying that every individual, the Logos is trying to express itself through you.
That's right.
And if you're ideologically possessed with a whole bunch of denominational nonsense, that's clogging up the hose, and then I can't get the Logos through you. Mm-hmm. So I need to clear all that ideologically possessed gunk out so that the Logos can clearly flow through you.
I mean, go back to one of your favorite, distinguish between the signal from the noise.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, there's value in assembling with all sorts of people. Be able to discern the signal from the noise, but consider everything.
Yes.
We need what's in other people, because I don't have what you have, you know what I'm saying? But if I spend time with you, I can then, old adage, two minds are better than one, or,
So, the concern that I have, and this isn't a critique of this sermon necessarily at all, but the reality of human nature is that people they crave certainty and they crave approval. And whenever you meet a group of people that, because they have beliefs, they claim to provide certainty, you want approval by that group, so you will accept, and you crave certainty. So you will accept the certainty because you crave it, and because it also at the same time provides approval by this group. So now you're accepted by a group. And the more you normalize to the center of that in group, the more accepted you are. So there could be some inauthentic things at play, like
you lose yourself.
You lose yourself, yes. You lose yourself, and you lose your own perspective.
Or you lose what God wants from you, individualized.
Well, see, I had a question, and I didn't even know to ask this question until recently, like within a year ago. And that question is, what is my perspective on things? And if you've been a Christian for a very long time, I think that's a harder question to answer than people think.
Yes, it is.
Because, like, I talk to Calvinists almost every day online, and they think that their perspective is Calvinism. And an independent Baptist thinks that his, perspective is the independent Baptist statement of faith, whatever. They think that that's their perspective, but it's not. That is a unified, centralized perspective of an in-group, and you've outsourced your own perspective and kind of turned the spigot off to your own perspective so that you can normalize with that in-group. And it took me years and years and years to figure out that when I came to certain controversial passages, I was interpreting them and teaching them as I was expected to as a Baptist, rather than what I actually thought the text was saying. And it took me years to realize that. It took me years to, what is my perspective? And so when you're trying to, so yes, you have, like the Ephesians 4:16 edification model, which I very strongly promote. You have to be with other people. But the struggle is, how can we be with other people, get the dialogos going from them, so where we can both interact with the logos through each other, separate the signal from the noise, grow in our discernment capacity, grow in our procedural knowledge of how to interpret scripture, separate the signal from the noise, all this kind of stuff is going on. How do we gather with other people without outsourcing our own perspective and sense making to the group so that they'll accept us? Which I think it's so subconscious we don't know it's happening. We just do it. We just do it.
We do.
And so I think I would say anytime I would admonish and advocate people to gather together as a group, which I do believe in doing, that it would come along with a warning to not outsource your perspective or sense making to that group.
And it's not just your sense making, it's also how your relationship with God has formed in you. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not just, yes, we need to think through and make sense of things and, call a spade a spade. I'm all about that, but I also feel like that my relationship with God is not yours, and I'm not wanting you to have I'm not trying to force you to have what I have.
Right.
But I want you to have what is meant for you to have.
With God.
Therefore, you can do the job, the role, the service that God intends for you to be part of that body, to be part of, something bigger than yourself, which in my opinion is why we gather.
The thing that popped in my head is when the tendency of people to use their in-group as a proxy for God. You want to be accepted by God, and you want to follow God. And if you're embedded in an in-group, like a local church, there's a tendency to think that the in-group accepting you is God accepting you, or the in-group approving of your actions, and your actions, I guess, is also God approving of your actions. Now, I read something from a Catholic recently where they come out and admit this. Like, they admit that it's actually in their writings, in some, like this particular one that I read, it was actually in the writing that he recognized God's working through the magisterium of the Catholic Church, and he knew that he believed that approval by the church meant approval by God. Well, Baptists, Assemblies of God, will probably be similar to this. They believe in something called soul liberty, where the church does not have the authority nor the ability to mediate between you and God. That's really, your relationship with God is your own relationship with God.
Thanks to Jesus Christ.
Thanks to Jesus Christ. Yes,
That's
he's
right.
the only mediator between
That's
God and
it.
man, the man Christ Jesus. And so we doctrinally know that the church cannot mediate between us and God, but subconsciously we have it do so anyway.
Well, it's like driving your car with a cruise control. You're in your car, and the cruise control keeps you at a steady pace, but you've got to be able to steer it. And I feel the same is true with being in a body. You've got the momentum with the group.
Yeah.
The basics of the body that you are serving with and growing with, hopefully, is towards, it's got the same momentum.
Yeah.
But then you have to be able to steer, if you will, based upon your experiences with God, based upon
So it's like knowing what processes you can let the group do versus what processes you need to retain for yourself.
right. And I would warn against.
And that takes a bit of discernment there
It does
too.
that, but I would also say you have to be careful not to be so haughty and so difficult and so judgmental, either.
Right.
It's
That's actually very thought-provoking to think of it in that way. The human mind tries to automate as much as it can because,
it takes less energy.
yeah, thinking to solve problems is very calorically expensive, and your brain takes up 20% of the calories that your whole body uses. A lot of people don't realize that. And so that's, your body's constantly trying to automate things. So if there are some things that could be automated to the group, maybe that's better. Like maybe you believe in maybe you believe in outreach or evangelism, and the church has programs to do that, and you just go participate
Right,
in them.
exactly. Maybe God hasn't
take
necessarily
take
impressed
advantage of that
upon
momentum.
You. Yes,
To participate in some of these programs.
exactly. But don't let that replace what you are seeking in your
Right,
personal
right.
transformation and growth.
You still have some jobs to do yourself, which you
Exactly.
cannot outsource to them.
Exactly.
And you have to know what those are. I like that. I really like that. It's very thought-provoking. Let me see if there's anything else in here that I think that we need to hit on. I think sitting sideways is messing with my lower back.
Might have to sit across the table.
Yeah, or we could do it over there where the couch curves over there.
Maybe so.
Or be a little more natural, and then we could play footsie. I think this is the last comment that I wrote. Maybe we'll hit this comment, and then we can wrap it up. He did talk about a support system versus a root system. Like when you first start off as a Christian, you have a support system, other people, and then you grow your own roots. So that when the storm comes, you can sustain yourself. So
That's
I thought
right.
that was a good point too. This last comment that I made, and this wasn't because of anything that was said necessarily, this wasn't a point in the sermon, but this was something that occurred to me randomly as I'm thinking during the closing song, I think. I wrote down, church for some is a user interface, a modality of synchronicity that taps into a higher reality. I don't even know if we should even try to develop this right now, because I'm not even sure what I'm thinking about it. But I think that there's, just because we're humans, because we're in the image of God, I think there is power in the spoken word.
Absolutely.
The logos, what's the rhema, the other kind of word that happens. God spoke and the universe happens. And I think there's a little bit like humans are growing reality. It's like the way John Vervaeke explained Jehovah's relationship with Israel is an invitation to grow the future with him, which is an amazing way to say that. It's all embedded in the name Jehovah, I am that I am. You come with me, and whatever exists, you help bring it to pass, kind of thing. And because all humans are in the image of God, I truly believe that the spoken word has creative power in the future, like this prehension ability, even for lost people. For example, a lost army general can make plans and speak them, and they come to pass. A lost person can utter the plans for a computer and then have it built. I mean, there's power in the spoken word. There's this power, and it's almost like Christianity is a user interface. Like that power is what it is, and Christianity is like a user interface for that as a Christian you would think ties back into the supreme authority of it. But it's a point of interaction that we have where we can tap into this. So prayer, like anybody who says something enough can create synchronicities in their universe. Like if you go buy a blue Toyota, you're suddenly going to start seeing a bunch of blue Toyotas.
Because it's on your mind. It's in your world. It's relatable.
So then and even people who are completely secular and they're like the habits of successful people kind of thing, they talk about writing down your goals and looking at them often. The more you say things and look at them, the more likely they are to come to pass in your life, which is a strange thing. Or the more, like if you're trying to diet or lose weight, the more you look at your activity plan or your eating plan, the more likely you are to stick to it. That kind of, the more you look at it, the more you say it. That's just a thought that I had, is that it's like Christianity is a user interface for a modality of synchronicity with the universe. I don't know. Maybe that's a throwaway comment. Who knows? Tapping into the processor of our great computer. Anything else you feel like pointing out from today?
No.
Well, I enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed the one earlier too, at lunch, which
Me too.
seemed like it was more. It seemed like there was some freshness there that it was more difficult to capture.
Yeah.
Talking later, but I always enjoyed that. And I love you.
I love you.